Hi, I'm Tristan from NoiseGate, here today with the Arturia MatrixBrute, which has been out for a little while now, but remains one of the best deals available for serious synth enthusiasts. It's hard to think of a more powerful monophonic synth than the MatrixBrute, and you could probably spend the rest of your life just learning new features and functions. So to save you some time, I thought we'd go through 10 things you may not know about the Arturia MatrixBrute. Alright, you're probably aware that this matrix of buttons can be used for modulation routing. For example, routing LFO1 to the pitch of VCO1 just by pressing the intersecting button and choosing the modulation depth with this knob. Okay, each modulation source can have up to 16 simultaneous destinations, each with varying modulation depths, plus or minus. You probably also know that these buttons can also be used to record presets by pressing the preset button. In this mode, each of these buttons is a different preset. But what you might not be aware of is that these presets aren't just scattered randomly, they're actually organized into categories. If we think of these buttons in groups of 4 columns, the first column is generally a rhythmic or a sequence sound. The second column is generally a bass sound. The third column is generally a polyphonic sound. And the fourth column is generally a lead sound. And this repeats on each group of 4 columns. So sequenced, bass sound, polyphonic sound, and lead sound. So this is really handy if you've just bought a MatrixBrute and you want to just try some different pre-made presets, or if you're in a store and want to get an idea of how it sounds really quickly. And if you take issue with my use of the word polyphonic there, just wait till we get to tip number 2. Okay, this tip was inspired by a video by Mark Doty on his Automatic Gainsay YouTube page, where he talks about the difference between note polyphony and note articulation, and the confusing associated terminology. Paraphonic, for example, refers to a synth that can play more than one note at a time, but each note shares the same filter and amp, whereas a true polyphonic synth will have an amp and a filter for each note. Although the MatrixBrute is technically a monophonic synth, there is a voice mode called Paraphonic, which allows us to play the 3 oscillators individually to play up to 3 notes polyphonically. While they will often all share the same filter and amp, we do have 2 filters at our disposal, and easily enough envelopes to articulate the 2 filters independently. So we can really quickly set up a sound that has oscillator 1 going through filter 1, being articulated by envelope number 1, and oscillator 2 going through filter number 2, which we can articulate using envelope number 3. So what we have here goes quite a bit beyond what the usual definition of paraphonic is, and Mark Doty has dubbed this kind of flexibility variophonic. I'll let you check out the rest of his video for more info on that, but just let it be known that the MatrixBrute transcends the world of paraphonic. Staying on the topic of note articulation, the MatrixBrute has a third voice mode called duo split, which, as the name implies, lets you split the keyboard in 2 and play a single oscillator sound on the left and a 2 oscillator sound on the right. And you might be wondering how that's possible given the MatrixBrute has only one amplifier. As you can hear with this patch, triggering one note re-triggers the rest of the notes. But engaging duo split mode actually activates a second hidden amplifier used for the sound on the left, which is controlled by envelope number 3. So the MatrixBrute really has 2 filters and 2 amps. With the MatrixBrute, we have 16 modulation sources and 16 modulation destinations. The first 12 of the destinations are chosen for us, but we can easily add 4 more of our choosing just by holding down one of these buttons and turning our desired parameter. Things are a little different when it comes to the modulation sources, however, and all 16 are already chosen for us. However, you'll notice the last 4 are labeled M1 through M4, which refers to the 4 macro buttons across the front. These are really useful because they are located right next to the pitch bend and mod wheel, and each can control up to 16 simultaneous destinations with independent modulation depth per assignment. And if you're playing around with the factory presets, make sure you try out the macro knobs because they usually map to something interesting that makes the preset really come to life. Although the MatrixBrute's angle design may be reminiscent of a famous fixed architecture synth, the Matrix patch bay with assignable destinations make it one of the most flexible, semi-modular synths ever made, and their flexibility extends beyond internal routings. As you can see, all of the 12 modulation destinations are duplicated on the back in control voltage ins and outs. This is great if you own modular hardware like a Eurorack system, or if you own an audio interface with DC coupled outs like a UA Apollo, or the brand new NI Complete Audio 6 Mark II. Once you start integrating software like VCV Rack or Ableton's CV tools with the MatrixBrute via CV, it really opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Make sure you check out our articles on DC coupling and VCV Rack on our website for more info. It's not uncommon for a synth to have an LFO that breaks the 20 Hz threshold into audio rate for extreme modulation possibilities, but this is usually a secondary function of a regular LFO, or even just a regular oscillator acting as a modulation source. Here on the MatrixBrute, however, we have a whole section dedicated to audio rate modulation. The first knob allows for fairly standard cross modulation, where oscillator 1 is modulating oscillator 2, for some FM types of sounds. The second knob is bipolar and goes considerably further, allowing VCO3 to modulate either VCO1 or VCO2. So we can actually get true cross modulation happening, where oscillators 1 and 2 are both modulating each other. And then VCO3 can be used to modulate either the Steiner filter or the ladder filter. And finally, noise can be used to modulate either VCO1 or the Steiner filter. It's pretty well known that the MatrixBrute has an analog effects processor with 5 variations, all of which are based on a delay effect. As well as 2 delay variations, we also have chorus and flange, which are achieved by using an LFO to modulate a very short delay time. And at the end, there is a reverb effect type. Now, analog reverb processors are not especially common. The Buchla easel is known for having a spring reverb tank, but what we have here is quite a bit different. It's actually just a lot of very short delays, which when you think about it is how reverb functions in reality. So we can get some really interesting results using this technique. You may be familiar with the Brute oscillator, which was first featured in the original Mini Brute. Just one of these oscillators by themselves sounds huge, but here we have 2 of them, plus a more run-of-the-mill third oscillator. In addition to the range of timbres possible using the Brute oscillator controls, we can also introduce a sub-oscillator, which can blend between 2 waveforms. This goes from a sine wave to what looks initially like a square wave, but on closer inspection, it's actually a clipped sine wave. So we can easily find a midpoint that maintains that sub-equality we associate with sine waves, but also adding a bit of extra bite. The third function of the Matrix, as we can see from these 3 buttons, is of course the sequencer. But a function added to the MatrixBrute after its release allows you to use the sequencer to program the arpeggiator. This is sort of like a mix between an arpeggiator and a sequencer, so we access it by pressing the arpeggiator and the sequencer buttons together. In this mode we can play up to 4 notes at a time. The bottom 3 groups of 4 buttons represent our 4 notes, just at different octaves. So we can easily program which notes are played back at what time and at what octaves. Let's just try a random pattern here and see how it sounds. Cool. We can also use the red line across the top of the matrix to change the rhythm by turning steps on or off. We can also transpose steps up or down by using the transport controls. And of course we can still use the rest of the arpeggiator controls to further modify the playback behavior. Last of all, there's a case. That's pretty much it. Arturia make a really nice, tough, hard case specifically for the MatrixBrute. It's got a nice sort of tweed finish, and it says MatrixBrute on the front. Thanks very much for watching. Please leave any feedback or questions in the comment section below, and we'll see you next time.